So I worry about the artificial intelligence replacing jobs narrative, which was actually very popular in the Great Depression. It goes back to Homer's Iliad or Aristotle. These were worried about machines replacing jobs.
Yeah. So let's go deeper on that because you said you're worried about the narrative. I mean, like I was born in the late '70s. I recall the fear of automation, right? The
Oh,
factory
that
work,
that was automation. Yeah, that
right?
word was popularized
Right,
there.
and like it's very similar, right? Today,
It's also a Greek word. It appears automati. I'm not pronouncing it right. In the Iliad, and I think it's in the Iliad, 700 BC or about.
yeah. So when you say you're worried about it, are you worried that we actually have the AI take over the jobs? Or are you worried about kind of the degradation
It's
of
right. It's
of
both. Yeah, loss of confidence.
okay.
So you had the stock market crash of 1929, and you had discussion that preceded it about technological unemployment. That was a newly popular phrase.
And what was driving that at the time?
It was the appearance of new technologies. We had phonograph records, we had radio, uh, and they replaced jobs. It made a concentrated inequality. You could be a star, a musician, or a singer. People identify with the successful person, like Elon Musk.
Yeah, and well, you're talking about that too. You're saying that the singer being replaced, it's that, well, you no longer have to go to the live show because you're the phonograph, right? You can hear the recording,
Right.
right? And I mean, when you think about kind of that whole fear coming from AI, is it just truly a narrative? Is that, I mean, we've evolved since the Great Depression, right? We found ways to employ,
Yeah.
ways to create. So, how do you kind of approach the AI revolution today?
I think that it's more narrative than reality. I mean, it is true that they are replacing some kinds of jobs, just as they were replacing some kinds of jobs in the Great Depression.
And is that a deflationary type of event if that happens?
Or
Or
it depends on how the narrative runs. It could be either way. But the idea that you might be out of a job, say you were studying French literature and you thought maybe there's something for me as a translator.
yeah.
No, there isn't.
I do recall like when I was kind of coming out of high school and the likes that it seemed like with the computer the panacea was that the voice to text recognition, right? If there was software back then,
Yeah,
it was
right.
clunky. But now we just take it for granted, right? It's everywhere. It's in your car, it's in your phone. It's almost ubiquitous of this
Yeah.
that was so difficult. But did it really change a lot? And so I see the advancement. There's something better about it in society, but I don't feel like it really destroyed a bunch of, what would be a stenographer's job of taking.
Yeah, there aren't many stenographers. The AI narrative is scary, but it hasn't really had the effect that the technological unemployment narrative has. But I think we have to wait for a mutation in the narrative or some big event.
Yeah, I mean, it's all about the political spin or just the narrative in general, right? If you call it welfare, it has more of a negative connotation. If you're like,
Right,
oh, I need some assistance, right? And so it's framing the way that
right.
the policy is, right?
So Donald Trump speaks of the great coal miners need jobs.
And how many coal miners do you believe are in this country? Yeah.
It's getting automated, I think.
Right, right. It's a very small piece, but we hear about them every political cycle, right?
Yeah,
It's the coal miners, and I don't know the exact number, but I believe it's fewer than 100,000 people working coal
yeah, yeah.
mines. And on that taking hold on immigration, you know, I think about the dynamics that changed post pandemic, where we lost some people, some to immigration, unfortunately, some to deaths, and during that period. We had obviously an aging population, so some natural retirement. We plugged the gap over the last few years of that need for worker through immigrants. How does that change the dynamic with this very nationalistic view, this kind of it's U.S. versus everyone and immigrants go home, right? How does that change our labor market?
It makes it tighter. It would be inflationary if you can't bring lower income workers who are in the wrong place in their home country.
Yes. But what about the idea that the labor market's already tight in the U.S.? See, well, I guess I'm thinking about is that, the unemployment rate just went to on around 4.2%. That doesn't sound to me like there's a lot of, there's a lot of people looking for work out there that aren't being employed, right? It's a very small fraction of the working population. And so, without those immigrants, we would have a much higher unemployment rate. But what happens in that situation? Let's say we don't have the immigrants and people don't want to be here, irrespective of it's low wages or it's medium wages. What happens to the dynamics of our labor market?
Well, it's hard to say.
Yeah.
Some of our sources of immigrants are changing. When I visited Mexico for the first time, I felt a little disappointed. It seemed like America, the United States.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a lot of similarities in our cultures too, right? I mean, yeah, there's some negatives in this culture and that culture as well, but we share a lot. I mean, I'm from California. That was Mexico, right? Texas.
Yeah, and we seized it from them.
That's right. So it's not, to me, it's not shocking to see we share some cultural effects, right?
The idea, the narrative that immigrants are criminals is overly strong. Narratives don't necessarily have a basis in fact. And I think that most of the Mexican immigrants, they actually have a lower crime rate than Native Americans, North Americans.
Yeah, but that doesn't sell well. That doesn't sell well in the political landscape, right?
Yeah, that's why narrative economics ought to be important.
We talk about it, investing being a profession. And when I hear the word profession, I think, okay, well, there's certain professions that I wouldn't want to do myself. Like let's just say electrician. I need some electrical work done. I'm not going to go start fiddling with the wires, right?
Well, some people do.
People do though, right? Yeah. And I know people who do. And there's just certain things that sometimes, you need an expert for. And, the expert isn't always trying to forecast the market. The expert is not, someone who is always outperforming. Sometimes it's just the basics, right? Trying to educate, right? And it brings me back to you as a professor. How do we bolster this financial literacy and this education to create more business leaders?
I have to add, I have my own finance course, which is available to all with no fee if you choose the right options. I think that we are in a world where people around the world are becoming more knowledgeable about investing. Yeah, I have students all over the world now. They even come to my office hours on rare occasions. But we ought to be in a world of increasing knowledge about all sorts of things. And investor education is part of it.